Well, hello everyone. I wanted to put together a video here that covers some of the aspects of cognitive development. And I wanted to focus on just one theorist here, and that is the work of a man by the name of Jean Piaget. So let's go ahead and get started. Just so that we're clear, with this material on cognitive development, let me turn around and make sure we have our definitions straight. Now, remember that cognition means mind. And so when we talk about cognitive development, we're talking about mental development. Now, in a prior chapter, we talked about the development of the mind from a quantitative approach. When we turn around and look at things such as intelligence testing, we look at scores such as IQ scores of 100 or 130 or 145 or scores of 70 or whatever the case may be. That is an example of a quantitative approach because you're trying to apply a numbers method to understanding intellect. With this chapter, what we're going to turn around and do is more of a qualitative approach and try and look at things in terms of how do we reason, how do we rationalize, how do we think things through? Because as I've said before, how you think something through when you're 3 years of age is not the same as how you do it even when you're 7. How you do it at age 7 is not the same as how you do it when you're 12. And that will actually change as you get older. Even at age, say, 20 is not the same as how you rationalize things at age 12 and so on. So we're going to use a qualitative approach in how we go about this. The first person I want to really tie into this is a gentleman by the name of Jean Piaget. Piaget was something of a child prodigy. He actually wrote his first research paper and got it published when he was 10 years old. Okay, got it published in his local newspaper. Uh, Basically, he graduated high school when he was 14, graduated with his bachelor's degree when he was 18, and finished his PhD by the time he was 21. So this guy was amazing in that regard. Basically, he developed what is called his cognitive stages of development. In trying to understand how a child reasons and rationalizes things, he developed a four-stage theory to explain what goes on and how a child looks at the world and so on. So let's look at these four stages of cognitive development according to Jean Piaget. The very first stage, Piaget would tell you, is what is referred to as the sensory motor stage. This actually starts at the point of birth. And Piaget was a bit controversial because he turned around and claimed that even infants had the ability to develop cognitively at this time. They had the ability to take in information, okay? For me as a professor to say that college students can take in information, no one's going to question that. They see them take notes, they see them reading material, highlighting things. Yes, you can turn around and what we call assimilate information. But the idea that an infant can assimilate was quite controversial when he came up with this claim. And he said, oh, absolutely, they can assimilate. They can take in information through their senses. Okay. And basically, they can also take in information through physical movement or motor behavior. Imagine watching an infant, react to one colorful item over another. That's a form of taking in information, something that we call assimilation. Imagine also a toddler or an infant, someone younger than 2 years of age, that is playing with a ball, and maybe they lean on a rubber ball, and the ball rolls away and they plop, they fall to the ground. They're learning something. The ball will not hold them up, it'll roll away. But if they lean against the side of a piece of furniture, they may be able to stand without any problem because it's not going to roll away. So Piaget was able to prove that even infants can take in information. They're not taking notes, but they take in information through their senses and through physical movement. Thus, what we call the sensory motor stage. As I just said, this concept is what we call assimilation and accommodation. So the premise here, assimilation simply means the ability to take in information. Okay, when Piaget, through his research and his write-ups, showed this to a lot of the psychological community, they went, okay, we see your point. I guess you got us. Even infants can take in information. All right. He said, let me take it one step farther. Infants even have the ability to do what is called accommodation. Accommodation simply means that you can check information for accuracy, and update your knowledge base as necessary. And when Piaget made this claim, this thing called accommodation, that they can make accommodations, they can check prior knowledge and update as necessary, a lot of the psychological community exploded and said, no, 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 you cannot do that. Infants and toddlers cannot check things for accuracy and update. He said, I'll prove it to you. So imagine the following, okay? Imagine turning around and having an infant who's in a situation where they have before them a set of keys, maybe plastic keys, children's keys. They're colorful, and things like that. If you have an infant sitting on a table and you take a set of keys and you rattle them in front of them, most infants, if they can, are going to pick them up, take them from you gently, and probably put them in their mouth. Imagine, if you would, taking the keys away gently, and say you're working with a 6-month-old or an 8-month-old, and you go ahead and you cover the keys with a cloth. What do you think most 6-month-old or 7-month-old or 8-month-old infants are going to do once they can no longer see the keys because the cloth is in the way? And the answer is they're going to go look for something else. Out of sight means out of existence. Excuse me. But around 12 months of age, sometimes sooner, sometimes later, you try the exact same thing with an infant, and you put something such as a set of keys in front of them, toy keys, and you cover them with a cloth. What a lot of infants will turn around and do is look to see if the keys are actually gone. What they are doing, in essence, is checking to see if out of sight really means out of existence. That's what they're doing, okay? This is an example of accommodation. This particular type of accommodation, where they're checking prior information, is what we call object permanence. Imagine you turn around and see the picture there of an infant looking at a plastic elephant, and then you hide the plastic elephant, and at 5 and 6 and 7 months, 8 months of age, they just look elsewhere. But you turn around and put a piece of paper between them and the elephant when they're 12 months of age. Trust me when I say they'll try to gently push the paper away, or they'll look around it, okay? They are showing signs of accommodation, an example known as object permanence, all right? They're checking information for accuracy and updating their knowledge base. Now, a real good game for this, okay, to study object permanence, if you have a toddler, if you have a child that's about 10 months old or 12 months old, and see if they're starting to learn this, is peekaboo, okay? If you ever played peekaboo with a little child, you might turn around and cover their eyes using their hands gently, and you can remove your hands, and there you are, okay? Or maybe you do that yourself. You cover your eyes, and then you remove your hands, and no matter when you do it, you're still there, or they're still there. And they can get so enthralled with this because they're so amazed. Oh my gosh, you still exist. This is an example of learning object permanence. And one of the big things about this is this is not going to happen. This is not going to happen until they possess what we call mental maturation, until they are mentally mature enough to do this. All right? You try this at 2 months and 3 months and 5 months, they're not going to understand it. You try this at 11 months or 12 months, there's enough mental maturation, they'll understand what you're doing. They begin to grasp the concept. So during this first stage, infants show the ability to take in information, assimilation, and even check it as needed. Object permanence is an example of accommodation. The second of four stages of Piaget's theory is referred to as the pre-operational stage. And according to Piaget, this stage runs from typically age 2 to age 7. Now, by this time, they understand object permanence. That is no longer an issue. But they don't understand operational logic. They don't understand how things work. Okay? They don't understand the steps involved. So what they do a lot of times is they make up their own logic. For example, they might, instead of saying that, mommy and daddy's car is broken, they might say it's sick, or that the television, instead of saying it's turned off, they might say it's asleep, because they're making up their own logic that makes sense to them. This pre-operational style of thinking, where they're making up their own logic, they lack the understanding of logic, is what is called intuitive thought. Intuitive thought. And intuitive thought is really a shortcoming. It's basically explains and describes how they think, making things up as they understand it, because they don't understand actual operational logic. Operational logic. It's pre-operational at this time. A good example of this is what is called egocentrism. This is an example of the limitations of this ages 2, 3, 4, that kind of stuff, all the way up to age 7. During this time, a lot of toddlers and small children, 2, 3, 4-year-olds, they can only see things from their own perspective. They cannot perceive something from a perspective other than their own. All right? If, for example, you turn around and are talking to a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old on the phone, maybe it's your son or daughter, maybe it's your niece or nephew, if you're a grandparent and you're talking to your grandson or granddaughter, they're on the phone and they say to you, Grandma, Grandpa, what do you think of this brand new toy? And you sort of smile and tell them, well, honey, I can't see it. And they might get frustrated with you because they're looking at it. I can see it. Why can't you see it? Well, you're across town or, across the country and you're not able to see these things. But in their mind, it's right in front of them. So, they can't fathom the idea that, perceiving things from any perspective other than their own. Why a child takes another child's toy and you try to convince a 3-year-old, see, you've made them cry. They don't see it that way. All they see is, I wanted it. They don't have the maturity to see any perspective other than their own. Another shortcoming of this age is what is called a conservation problem. This is something that you could actually try if you have children of your own or children you're babysitting, nephews, nieces, whatever, especially if they're 3, 4, 5 years of age, even 6 or 7. Try doing the following. Take 2 glasses, as you see there in the first picture on the left, marked A and B. Take 2 glasses that are identical in design, and right in front of a child, fill them halfway full with water. Even let the child, tell them it's a game, all right? Even let the child measure both, get down to eye level and see that there's the same amount of water in both. Once a child agrees that there's the same amount of water in both, pour the water from one of the glasses into a different shaped container. Here you see where you've poured the water from glass B into something that looks almost like a test tube. Once you've done that, ask the child this: is there still the same amount of liquid in both containers? Maybe they agreed before you poured that A and B had the same amount. Now you ask them, do A and C have the same amount? And you'll be surprised that a lot of kids that are 3 and 4 and 5 years of age, their answer is no, they're not the same anymore. Sometimes they'll point to the glass that is taller, and sometimes they'll point to the other glass that's not as tall but wider. They don't understand conservation. The definition of conservation is this: physical matter, sounds like a physics lecture, physical matter does not change, even though its appearance may change. Physical matter does not change, even though its appearance may change. You pour the liquid from one container to another, it looks different, but it hasn't really changed. Okay? You try this demonstration with a child that's more like 7, 8, 9, 10. Now you're outside of the pre-operational age. Is there still the same amount in both glasses? Most will look at you and go, well, of course it's still the same. But a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old might be fooled. This is a shortcoming of this age. You can even do this with number, all right? You could turn around and even do it with what's called mass. Take two balls of clay that are identical in size, a child agrees, and then right in front of them, take one of the balls of clay and squish it out, flatten it into a pancake and ask them, is it still the same amount? And you might be surprised how many times kids will say, no, they're no longer the same. One has more or the other has more. I will go ahead and post some videos that you can find on YouTube that show examples of conservation problems, and you can see how children have to work to get through these. And I may do the exact same with the sensory motor stage and the idea of object permanence. So be on the lookout for that. The third level is known as the concrete operational stage, and this basically occurs from ages 7 to 12. During this time, children, you're thinking 7 years old, about second grade, third grade, to about 12 years of age when they're approaching junior high and things of that sort. By this age, all those conservation problems have been learned. You turn around with a 12-year-old and try to pour liquid from one container to another. Is it different or not? Well, of course it's not different. It's still the same. All right? Intuitive thinking, the idea that they suffer from egocentrism and can only see from their own perspective. Piaget says that that has pretty much been remedied. They can now see from another person's perspective. All right? Thinking basically becomes logical. That's the whole idea here. Thinking still... our thinking becomes step by step. It no longer is intuitive. They know by the concrete operational stage, it's no longer pre-operational. They know by the concrete operational stage that logic, a car is turned off, or, something is broken, it's not sick, it's turned off, it's not asleep. So they move beyond those stages by this time. The fourth and final stage, according to Piaget, is called the formal operational stage. This, according to Piaget, starts around age 12. All right? And by this time, all of those other things have been learned. They can think logically. They can turn around and see things from other perspectives. That had been learned in a prior stage. But by now, they possess the ability to think in the abstract. By abstract thinking, what I mean is this. They are able to turn around, all right, and mentally envision things without having to have them in front of them. They can mentally envision things without having to have them in front of them. So that's an amazing ability. If you architects are really good at this. They might look at an open field but can envision where a building is going to be here in the next year and where you're going to put the supports and so on and so forth. They can turn around and imagine something mentally. They don't have to have a copy of it right there. Additionally, during this time, logical thinking is quite common, and to solve a problem, you can go through it step by step by step, systematic testing and things of that sort. So you see here how the thinking has changed, how cognitive development has changed. In the early part, all you could do was take in information through your senses and motor behaviors, though you could learn to check it. Later, when it came to figuring out things in the pre-operational stage, you made up your own logic. But eventually you got beyond intuitive thought by stage 3 and you could think in the logical. In stage 3, you can do a lot, but you cannot think in the abstract until you reach stage 4, the formal operational stage. Okay, hope all that makes sense. Watch it again. Start and stop as needed to write this down. Good job, everyone. Take care.